Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or watching movies, she was in her garage practicing boxing combinations on a heavy bag her father had hung from the ceiling. Her hands were small but incredibly fast, and she had a natural instinct for fighting that surprised everyone who knew her. Growing up in a small town in Texas, Sarah faced constant challenges. Her family didn't have much money, and she watched her single mother work 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. Sarah's father had left when she was 10, but before he disappeared from their lives, he had taught her one important lesson. Never let anyone make you feel weak, mija. Your strength comes from inside, not from what others think of you. Those words stayed with her through high school, where she excelled in both academics and athletics. She was captain of the wrestling team, the only girl who had ever held that position at her school. The boys on the team initially resisted having a female leader, but Sarah proved herself by consistently outworking and outthinking them during practice. She studied wrestling techniques obsessively, watching videos online and practicing moves until they became second nature. When graduation approached, Sarah knew she wanted something bigger than what her small town could offer. She had good grades and could have gone to college, but the financial burden would have been too much for her family. The military seemed like the perfect solution. She could serve her country, get an education, and prove to herself and everyone else that she was capable of anything. The Marine Corps recruiter who visited her high school was a tall, intimidating man named Sergeant Rodriguez. He spoke about honor, courage, and commitment with such passion that Sarah knew immediately this was her path. After the presentation, she approached him with confidence that surprised even herself. "I want to be a Marine," she told him directly, looking him straight in the eye. Sergeant Rodriguez studied her for a moment. Sarah was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed maybe 120 pounds. Her long black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her dark eyes held a determination that reminded him of some of the best Marines he had served with. "It's not easy," he warned her. "The training is designed to break people down and build them back up stronger. Many people don't make it through. I'll make it through," Sarah replied without hesitation. The months leading up to her departure for boot camp were filled with intense preparation. Sarah ran every morning before school, did hundreds of push-ups and sit-ups in her room, and continued her boxing training with even more intensity. She read everything she could about Marine Corps history and traditions, memorizing the names of famous battles and the meanings behind the various ceremonies. Her mother was worried but proud. "Are you sure about this, Mija?" she asked one evening as they sat together on their small porch. "The Marines are known for being tough on everyone, but especially on women." Sarah squeezed her mother's hand. "I'm sure, Mom. This is what I need to do. I want to make something of myself, and I want to make you proud." The day finally came for Sarah to leave for Parris Island, the legendary Marine Corps training depot in South Carolina. As the bus pulled away from the recruiter station, Sarah watched her mother's figure grow smaller in the distance. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made her stomach flutter, but her resolve never wavered. The bus ride took most of the day, and Sarah spent the time talking with other recruits who were making the same journey. There were young men from all over the country, each with their own story about why they had chosen the Marines. Some wanted to follow in their father's footsteps, others were looking for direction in their lives, and a few, like Sarah, were simply determined to prove something to themselves and the world. When they finally arrived at Parris Island, everything changed instantly. Drill instructors swarmed the bus, shouting orders and demanding that everyone move faster than seemed humanly possible. Sarah grabbed her small bag and joined the chaos of recruits, scrambling to form lines on the painted footprints that covered the ground outside the receiving building. The next several hours were a blur of paperwork, medical examinations, and more shouting than Sarah had ever heard in her life. She was assigned to a platoon with 3 other female recruits and about 40 male recruits. The drill instructors made it clear from the beginning that everyone would be held to the same standards, regardless of gender. Drill instructor Staff Sergeant Williams was a muscular African-American woman who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and earned numerous commendations for her bravery in combat. She looked at the 4 women in the platoon with an expression that was both challenging and protective. "Listen up, ladies," she said in a voice that commanded absolute attention. "You're about to find out what you're really made of. Some of the men in your platoon think you don't belong here. Some of the other drill instructors think you'll quit before the end of the first week. I don't care what they think. What I care about is whether you have what it takes to earn the title Marine." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline rush through her body. This was exactly what she had been preparing for her entire life. She looked directly at Staff Sergeant Williams and gave a sharp nod of understanding. The first weeks of boot camp were a constant test of physical and mental endurance. The recruits were awakened at 0500 hours every morning and immediately began a schedule that included physical training, combat skills instruction, academic classes, and endless drill practice. The physical training was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Even with all her preparation, every morning began with a formation run that seemed to get longer each day. Sarah's legs ached and her lungs burned, but she forced herself to keep pace with the male recruits who were often 6 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than she was. During strength training sessions, she struggled with some exercises but excelled at others. Her years of boxing training had given her exceptional core strength and endurance. The combat training was where Sarah truly began to shine. The hand-to-hand combat techniques taught by the Marine Corps were similar to the boxing and wrestling skills she had been developing for years, but they were more aggressive and practical. The instructors taught them how to disable an opponent quickly and efficiently, using leverage and technique rather than pure strength. During one particularly intense training session, the recruits were paired up for grappling practice. Sarah was matched with a recruit named Thompson, a former high school football player from Alabama who stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds. Thompson had been making quiet comments about women in the Marines since the first day. Never quite loud enough for the drill instructors to hear, but clear enough for everyone in the platoon to understand his feelings. "Try not to hurt yourself, little girl," Thompson whispered as they prepared to begin the exercise. Sarah said nothing but positioned herself carefully, remembering everything her father had taught her about using an opponent's size against them. When the instructor gave the signal to begin, Thompson lunged forward with the confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation in his life. What happened next surprised everyone who was watching. Sarah sidestepped Thompson's charge and used his momentum to throw him off balance. Before he could recover, she had him in a submission hold that left him gasping for air and tapping frantically on the mat to signal his surrender. The drill instructor who was supervising the exercise looked impressed. "Good technique, Martinez. Next pair." Thompson got to his feet with a red face that was part embarrassment and part anger. He looked at Sarah with a mixture of respect and resentment that would define their relationship for the rest of boot camp. Word of Sarah's performance during combat training began to spread throughout the platoon. Some of the male recruits started to view her differently, recognizing that she possessed skills and determination that went beyond what they had initially assumed. Others, particularly those who shared Thompson's attitude about women in the military, became more determined to find ways to prove that she didn't belong. The academic portion of boot camp covered Marine Corps history, military law, first aid, and various technical subjects related to combat and leadership. Sarah excelled in these classes, often scoring higher than most of her male counterparts. She had always been a good student, but the structure and purpose of military education suited her perfectly. During weapons training, Sarah learned to handle various firearms with skill and precision. The M16A4 rifle became an extension of her body as she practiced the complex manual of arms until every movement was automatic. On the shooting range, her small hands actually gave her an advantage in achieving steady aim, and she consistently scored among the highest in her platoon. As the weeks progressed, Sarah noticed that she was being watched more closely than the other recruits. The drill instructors seemed to be looking for any sign of weakness or failure. She understood that as one of only 4 women in the platoon, her performance would be scrutinized and used to make judgments about all female Marines. This pressure motivated her to work even harder than she had been, if that was possible. She stayed up late studying military knowledge, practiced combat techniques during her limited free time, and pushed herself to excel in every aspect of training. Her determination impressed some of her fellow recruits and irritated others. One evening, as the recruits were cleaning their rifles after a long day on the shooting range, Thompson approached Sarah with several of his friends. "Hey, Martinez," he said loudly enough for most of the platoon to hear. "My buddies and I were talking, and we think you've been getting special treatment because you're a woman. We think the drill instructors are going easy on you." Sarah continued cleaning her rifle without looking up. "What kind of special treatment?" "Come on," Thompson continued. "You know they expect less from you during PT. Your push-up and pull-up standards are lower than ours. You get more time to complete the obstacle course. Face it, you're playing on easy mode." This was a common complaint among some male recruits who didn't understand that while women had different physical fitness standards, They were still expected to meet the same standards in combat training, academic performance, and overall military bearing. Sarah knew that trying to explain this to Thompson would be pointless. "If you think I'm getting special treatment," Sarah said calmly, finally looking up from her rifle, "then you're not paying attention to what's actually happening around here." Thompson's friends laughed, and he stepped closer to Sarah's bunk. "Maybe we should have a little competition to see how tough you really are. Just you and me, one-on-one. No drill instructors around to protect you." Sarah stood up slowly, her rifle now completely clean and properly assembled. She was fully aware that fighting outside of supervised training was strictly forbidden and would result in severe punishment for both participants. She was also aware that every recruit in the platoon was watching this confrontation and waiting to see how she would respond. "I don't need protection from drill instructors," Sarah said quietly, "and I don't need to prove anything to you." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thompson was clearly hoping to provoke Sarah into a fight that would get her in trouble and potentially kicked out of boot camp. Sarah recognized the trap and refused to walk into it. "That's what I thought," Thompson said with a satisfied smirk. "All talk, no action." Before Sarah could respond, Drill Instructor Staff Sergeant Williams entered the squad bay for evening inspection. The recruits immediately snapped to attention beside their bunks, and the confrontation was over for the moment. But Sarah knew this issue wasn't resolved. Thompson and his friends would continue to test her until they either accepted her as an equal or found a way to break her spirit. The weeks that followed were filled with increasingly difficult training exercises, and Sarah continued to excel despite the constant pressure from some of her fellow recruits. The crucible, the final test of boot camp, was approaching, and everyone in the platoon could feel the tension building. During a particularly challenging obstacle course training session, disaster struck. Sarah was navigating a rope climbing exercise when the recruit ahead of her, who happened to be one of Thompson's friends, accidentally kicked loose a heavy wooden beam that was part of the obstacle structure. Sarah saw it falling but couldn't get out of the way quickly enough while hanging from the rope 20 feet above the ground. The beam struck her right hand with tremendous force, and she heard the sickening crack of breaking bones even before the pain hit. She managed to maintain her grip with her left hand long enough to lower herself safely to the ground, but by the time she reached the bottom, her right hand was already swelling and turning purple. The drill instructors immediately called for medical attention, and Sarah was rushed to the base medical facility. X-rays revealed that she had fractured 2 bones in her hand and severely damaged several tendons. The doctor, a Navy corpsman who had seen similar injuries many times, was direct in his assessment. "You're going to need surgery to repair this properly," he told her. "The healing process will take at least 8 to 10 weeks, probably longer. You'll need to be recycled to a new training platoon, which means starting boot camp over from the beginning." Sarah felt her heart sink. After all the progress she had made, all the challenges she had overcome, she would have to start over. Worse, she would be separated from Staff Sergeant Williams, who had become something of a mentor to her during the difficult weeks of training. "Isn't there any way I can continue with my current platoon?" Sarah asked. The doctor shook his head. "Absolutely not. You can't participate in combat training with that injury. And you certainly can't complete the crucible. The best thing you can do is focus on healing properly, so you'll be ready when you restart training." When Sarah returned to the squad bay that evening, her right hand wrapped in a thick cast that extended from her fingertips to her wrist, the reaction from her fellow recruits was mixed. Some expressed genuine concern for her injury and disappointment that she wouldn't be able to finish boot camp with them. Others, particularly Thompson and his group, saw her injury as proof that she didn't belong in the Marines. "Looks like the little girl couldn't handle the real training after all," Thompson said loudly as Sarah sat on her bunk, trying to figure out how she was going to manage basic tasks with only one functional hand. "It was an accident," said Martinez, one of the recruits who had become friendly with Sarah over the weeks. "Could have happened to anyone." "Accidents happen to people who can't keep up," Thompson replied. "Maybe this is a sign that she should find a different career path." Sarah said nothing, but she memorized every word of the conversation. She was already planning her comeback. The next morning, Sarah was transferred to a medical holding company where she would wait for her hand to heal before being assigned to a new training platoon. The holding company was filled with recruits who had been injured during various stages of training, and the atmosphere was quite different from the intense, structured environment of active training. Without the constant physical and mental challenges of boot camp, Sarah found herself with more time to think than she had experienced in weeks. She was angry about her injury and frustrated by the delay in her training, but she was also determined to use this setback as an opportunity to come back stronger than ever. During her medical appointments, Sarah learned that the injury to her hand was more complicated than initially diagnosed. The fractures had damaged nerve pathways, and even after the bones healed, she might experience reduced strength and mobility in her fingers. The doctor suggested that she consider whether continuing with Marine training was the best decision. "I've seen injuries like this end military careers before they really start," he warned her. "You might want to think about pursuing other options." Sarah's response was immediate and firm. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I'm going to finish what I started. Whatever limitations this injury creates, I'll find a way to work around them." While her hand healed, Sarah threw herself into physical training that didn't require the use of both hands. She ran longer distances than ever before, building her cardiovascular endurance to levels she had never achieved. She practiced combat techniques that relied primarily on her legs and left hand, adapting movements she had learned to compensate for her temporary disability. She also spent hours studying military knowledge, reading field manuals and memorizing information that would give her an advantage when she resumed formal training. Other recruits in the medical holding company were content to treat their time there as a vacation from the rigors of boot camp, but Sarah treated it as an intensive preparation period. After 6 weeks in medical holding, Sarah was cleared to resume limited training activities. Her cast was replaced with a lighter brace that allowed her to move her fingers, though her grip strength was still significantly reduced. The doctors warned her that she might never regain full function in her right hand, but Sarah had already begun developing techniques to compensate for this limitation. When she was finally assigned to a new training platoon to restart boot camp, Sarah discovered that word of her injury and her reputation had preceded her. The drill instructors knew about her performance in her previous platoon, and some of the recruits had heard stories about the woman who had been medically recycled after breaking her hand. Her new senior drill instructor was Staff Sergeant Johnson, a stocky man from Louisiana who had served multiple combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. During Sarah's initial interview, he studied her medical records and looked at her hand with obvious skepticism. "Martinez, I see here that you broke your hand, and they're saying you might have permanent limitations. Are you sure you want to continue with this training? There's no shame in admitting that you're not physically capable of meeting Marine Corps standards." Sarah stood at attention and looked directly into Staff Sergeant Johnson's eyes. "Sir, I am fully capable of meeting Marine Corps standards. My injury will not prevent me from becoming a Marine." Staff Sergeant Johnson studied her for a long moment. "We'll see about that, recruit. But I want you to understand that I won't give you any special treatment because of your injury. If you can't keep up, you'll be dropped from training permanently." "I understand, sir. I wouldn't want special treatment." Starting boot camp over from the beginning with a new platoon was both easier and harder than Sarah had anticipated. The physical training was easier because she was in better shape than when she had first arrived at Paris Island. Her months of preparation during medical holding had left her stronger and faster than most of the new recruits. The psychological aspect was more challenging. She had to watch new recruits struggle with concepts and skills that she had already mastered, while pretending that everything was new to her as well. She also had to prove herself all over again to drill instructors who didn't know her capabilities and fellow recruits who saw her injured hand as a sign of weakness. Her new platoon included several recruits who had heard rumors about her previous training experience. Some were impressed that she had chosen to restart rather than quit, while others viewed her as damaged goods who was taking up a spot that should go to someone without physical limitations. During her first week with the new platoon, Sarah quickly established herself as one of the top performers despite the limitations of her injured hand. She consistently scored highest in academic tests, excelled during physical training runs, and demonstrated combat techniques with skill that surprised both instructors and fellow recruits. However, her hand remained a constant source of difficulty. Simple tasks like assembling and disassembling her rifle took her longer than other recruits because her grip strength was compromised. During combat training, she had to modify techniques to compensate for her reduced ability to grab and hold opponents. Some recruits in her new platoon began making comments similar to those she had heard from Thompson and his friends in her original platoon. The ringleader this time was a recruit named Patterson, a former college football player who seemed to take personal offense at the idea that someone with a disability could become a Marine. "I don't understand why they let her stay in training," Patterson complained loudly during one evening cleaning session. "She's obviously not capable of performing at the same level as everyone else." What happens when we're in combat and she can't pull the trigger fast enough because of her gimpy hand? Sarah continued cleaning her rifle with methodical precision, using techniques she had developed to compensate for her reduced grip strength. She had heard variations of this complaint many times over the past weeks and had learned that responding only encouraged more criticism. Patterson's friend, a recruit named Williams, joined the conversation. Maybe she should be assigned to some desk job where her injury won't matter. Let someone who's fully functional take her place in infantry training. Other recruits in the squad bay were watching this exchange carefully. Some looked uncomfortable with the criticism directed at Sarah, while others nodded in agreement with Patterson's comments. Sarah knew that how she handled this situation would determine her standing in the platoon for the remainder of boot camp. "You know what I think?" Patterson continued, warming to his theme. "I think she's getting sympathy points from the drill instructors because she's a woman with a disability. They're afraid to drop her because it would look bad for the Marine Corps." This accusation stung Sarah more than any of the previous comments because it attacked not just her physical capability but her integrity. She had worked harder than anyone in the platoon and had never asked for or received special consideration. Her performance spoke for itself, even if some people refused to acknowledge it. Sarah finished cleaning her rifle and began preparing her equipment for the next day's training. As she worked, she noticed that several other recruits were watching her carefully, waiting to see how she would respond to Patterson's increasingly aggressive criticism. "You know what your problem is, Martinez," Patterson said, apparently frustrated by her lack of response. "You're too proud to admit that you don't belong here. A real Marine would have the honor to step aside and let someone capable take their place." At this, Sarah looked up from her gear preparation and spoke for the first time during the entire exchange. "Patterson," she said calmly, "when you can consistently outperform me in any aspect of training, then maybe your opinion about my capabilities will matter. Until then, you might want to focus on your own performance instead of worrying about mine." The squad bay fell silent. Patterson's face reddened, and Sarah could see that he was considering whether to escalate the confrontation. Before he could respond, one of the drill instructors entered for evening inspection, and everyone snapped to attention. But Sarah knew this confrontation was far from over. Patterson and his supporters would continue testing her until they either accepted her or found a way to force her out of training. What they didn't understand was that every challenge they presented only made her more determined to succeed. The tension between Sarah and Patterson's group continued to build over the following weeks. As boot camp progressed and the training became more intense, the pressure on every recruit increased dramatically. The crucible was approaching once again, and this time Sarah was determined that nothing would prevent her from completing it. During hand-to-hand combat training, Sarah had developed her own unique fighting style that compensated for the limitations of her injured hand. She relied more heavily on speed, leverage, and technique than on brute strength. Her boxing background, combined with months of adaptation, had made her surprisingly effective in close-quarters combat. The drill instructors began to notice Sarah's unconventional but successful approach to combat training. Staff Sergeant Johnson, who had initially been skeptical about her ability to complete training, started using her techniques as examples for other recruits. "Martinez has figured out something that the rest of you need to learn," he announced during one training session. "Fighting isn't about being the biggest or strongest person. It's about using your brain and adapting to whatever situation you face. Watch how she uses her opponent's momentum against them." This recognition from the drill instructors only intensified Patterson's resentment. He viewed Sarah's success as proof that the system was biased in her favor, rather than acknowledging that she had earned her achievements through skill and determination. The situation came to a head during a particularly challenging week of training that included extensive combat exercises, long-distance marches with full equipment, and complex tactical scenarios. All the recruits were exhausted and stressed, and tempers were running high throughout the platoon. On Thursday evening, after a brutal day of training that had lasted more than 16 hours, the recruits were given a rare hour of free time before lights out. Most used this time to write letters home, read, or simply rest their aching bodies. Sarah was in the corner of the squad bay, practicing modified combat techniques with an imaginary opponent. Patterson, who had been watching her with obvious irritation, finally snapped. "Enough with the show, Martinez," he said loudly, attracting the attention of everyone in the squad bay. "We're all tired of watching you pretend to be some kind of martial arts expert. Your broken hand makes you a liability, and everyone here knows it." Sarah stopped her practice and turned to face Patterson. She could see that he was surrounded by his usual group of supporters, and several other recruits had gathered to watch what was clearly going to be a significant confrontation. "I'm not pretending anything, Patterson," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm training, just like everyone else." "Training?" Patterson laughed harshly. "You call that training? You can't even make a proper fist with that damaged hand. What are you going to do in real combat? Slap the enemy to death?" Williams, Patterson's closest friend in the platoon, stepped forward to join the verbal assault. "Face it, Martinez. You're taking up a spot that should go to someone who can actually fight. When we get to the fleet, real Marines are going to have to compensate for your limitations." Two more of Patterson's supporters, recruits named Davis and Tucker, moved closer to Sarah. She realized that what had started as verbal harassment was escalating into something more serious. The four men were positioning themselves to surround her, and their body language suggested they were preparing for physical confrontation. "You know what I think?" Davis said with a sneer. "I think it's time someone showed Martinez what real Marines are capable of. Maybe then she'll understand that she doesn't belong here." Sarah quickly assessed the situation. She was outnumbered 4-1, but she had several advantages. The space was confined, which would limit their ability to use their size advantage effectively. More importantly, they were underestimating her capabilities because of their prejudices about her injury and her gender. Other recruits in the squad bay sensed that something serious was about to happen. Some moved away from the confrontation, not wanting to get involved in what could result in severe punishment for everyone present. Others moved closer, either to watch or to potentially intervene. "Last chance, Martinez," Patterson said, stepping within arm's reach. "Quit now and save yourself some embarrassment." Sarah's response was swift and decisive. As Patterson reached out to grab her shoulder, she intercepted his arm and used a technique she had perfected during her months of adapted combat training. Patterson found himself flying through the air and landing hard on the floor before he fully understood what had happened. Williams immediately lunged at Sarah, assuming that she had gotten lucky with Patterson and wouldn't be able to handle a second attacker. He was wrong. Sarah sidestepped his charge and used his momentum to send him crashing into a row of wall lockers with a tremendous bang that echoed through the entire squad bay. Davis and Tucker attacked simultaneously, thinking they could overwhelm her with coordinated aggression. Sarah had anticipated this and positioned herself so that she could use one attacker as a shield against the other. When Davis reached for her, she grabbed his arm with her good hand and spun him directly into Tucker's path. The two men collided and went down in a tangled heap. The entire confrontation lasted less than 30 seconds. Patterson was gasping for breath on the floor. Williams was struggling to get back to his feet after slamming into the lockers, and Davis and Tucker were trying to untangle themselves from each other. Sarah stood in the center of the chaos, breathing hard but otherwise unharmed. The squad bay was completely silent except for the groaning of the four men who had attempted to intimidate her. Every other recruit in the platoon stared at Sarah with expressions of shock, admiration, and newfound respect. Before anyone could speak, the squad bay door burst open, and Staff Sergeant Johnson charged in, followed by two other drill instructors. They had heard the commotion and come to investigate. "What the hell is going on in here?" Staff Sergeant Johnson roared, his eyes taking in the scene of four men on the floor and Sarah standing over them. Patterson struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "Sir, Martinez attacked us without provocation. She's dangerous and unstable." Staff Sergeant Johnson looked around the squad bay, noting the positions of all the recruits and the obvious evidence of what had actually occurred. Several recruits who had witnessed the entire confrontation exchanged glances, clearly torn between loyalty to their fellow recruits and respect for the truth. "Is that what happened, Martinez?" Staff Sergeant Johnson asked. Sarah stood at attention and spoke clearly. "Sir, I was practicing combat techniques when these four recruits surrounded me and began making threatening statements. When Patterson attempted to physically restrain me, I defended myself using techniques learned in this training program." One of the other drill instructors, Sergeant Rodriguez, stepped forward. "Did anyone else witness this altercation?" There was a long moment of silence as the recruits wrestled with their consciences. Finally, a recruit named Anderson, who had been neutral in the ongoing conflict between Sarah and Patterson's group, stepped forward. "Sir, Martinez is telling the truth. Patterson and his friends cornered her and threatened her. She only fought back when they put their hands on her." Several other recruits nodded in agreement, and gradually the true story of the confrontation emerged. Staff Sergeant Johnson listened to multiple accounts with growing anger. Not at Sarah, but at the 4 recruits who had violated one of the fundamental principles of Marine Corps training. Marines do not attack fellow Marines. Patterson, Williams, Davis, Tucker. Staff Sergeant Johnson said in a voice that could have cut steel. You 4 just demonstrated that you don't understand what it means to be Marines. Marines protect each other. They don't prey on each other. You will report to my office at 0500 hours tomorrow morning for disciplinary action. He then turned to address the entire platoon. Let me make something crystal clear to all of you. Recruit Martinez just demonstrated more Marine Corps values in 30 seconds than some of you have shown in weeks of training. She was outnumbered 4-1 and still managed to defend herself effectively without seriously injuring her attackers. That's exactly the kind of controlled aggression and tactical thinking we want to see from Marines. Patterson started to protest. Sir, she has an injury that makes her a liability. We were just trying to. Recruit Patterson. Staff Sergeant Johnson interrupted. The only liability I see in this squad bay is your inability to recognize a fellow Marine when you see one. Martinez has consistently outperformed most of this platoon despite her injury. She has adapted, overcome, and improvised, which are core Marine Corps principles. You, on the other hand, have shown prejudice, poor judgment, and a complete lack of honor. The 4 men who had attacked Sarah were subsequently removed from the platoon and faced disciplinary action that would delay their training by several months. Word of the incident spread throughout the training battalion, and Sarah found that her reputation among both drill instructors and fellow recruits had changed dramatically. No longer was she seen as the recruit with the broken hand, who might not be able to handle Marine Corps standards. Instead, she became known as the woman who had single-handedly defeated 4 larger opponents using superior technique and mental toughness. Her injury, rather than being viewed as a weakness, was now seen as evidence of her determination to overcome any obstacle. The remaining weeks of boot camp passed without significant incident. Sarah continued to excel in all areas of training, and her fellow recruits treated her with the respect she had earned. During the crucible, the final test of boot camp, she performed flawlessly despite the continued limitations of her injured hand. On graduation day, as Sarah stood in formation wearing the dress blue uniform of a United States Marine, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The injury that some people had seen as a reason to quit had actually become a source of strength and motivation that made her a better Marine than she might have been otherwise. Staff Sergeant Johnson approached her after the graduation ceremony. Martinez, I owe you an apology. When you first arrived in my platoon, I thought your injury would prevent you from meeting our standards. I was wrong. You've shown that determination and character matter more than physical perfection. Sarah saluted sharply. Thank you, sir. The Marine Corps taught me that we adapt, overcome, and succeed regardless of the obstacles we face. As she walked away from Paris Island as a newly minted Marine, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned during her time in boot camp. She had discovered that true strength comes not from the absence of limitations but from the ability to overcome them. Her broken hand had become a symbol of her resilience rather than a sign of weakness. Years later, when Sarah was serving as a drill instructor herself, she would often tell the story of her boot camp experience to new recruits who were struggling with their own challenges and limitations. She would explain that the Marine Corps doesn't require perfection. It requires the determination to become the best version of yourself, despite whatever obstacles you might face. The 4 men who had ridiculed her injury and attempted to intimidate her never completed Marine Corps training. They were dropped from the program and sent home after their disciplinary hearing revealed a pattern of behavior that was incompatible with Marine Corps values. Sarah's broken hand eventually healed as much as it ever would. She retained some limitations in grip strength and fine motor control, but she had adapted so completely to these limitations that they rarely affected her performance as a Marine. She served with distinction for 20 years, earning numerous commendations and promotions, and eventually retiring as a Master Sergeant. Throughout her career, whenever young Marines would ask her about overcoming adversity, Sarah would hold up her right hand and flex her fingers, which still moved slightly differently than those on her left hand. This hand taught me that our limitations don't define us, she would say. How we respond to those limitations defines us. The Marines didn't ridicule my broken hand because they thought I was weak. They tested me because they needed to know if I was strong, and when I proved that I was, they welcomed me as one of their own. The story of Sarah Martinez became part of Marine Corps legend. told and retold as an example of what it truly means to embody the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. She had remained faithful to her dream of becoming a Marine even when others doubted her capabilities, and the Marine Corps had remained faithful to its promise that anyone with the dedication and character to meet its standards could earn the title, Marine. Her broken hand, which had once been seen as a symbol of weakness and failure, became instead a testament to the power of determination, adaptation, and the unbreakable spirit that defines the finest Marines. She had faced ridicule and doubt, but she had answered both with courage, skill, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that earned her not just the respect of her peers, but a place in the proud tradition of Marines who refuse to accept limitations and never surrender in the face of adversity.